Everyone, welcome. I'm going to wait a minute while people come and join us. If you could all mute yourselves, I would appreciate that.
Okay.
So, good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs here at MOAD. I'm going to pin my video so I'm on the screen there. Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the challenging circumstances we are all in, and I hope everyone in the audience today is safe and healthy. MOAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Daniel Prude, and now the latest victim, Jonathan Price. We grieve for so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. As this list continues to grow, MOAD will continue to say their names, as our commitment to honoring the victims and to attaining true racial justice is unwavering. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. With deep respect, MOAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands and thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I welcome you this evening to MOAD Online and to the program series African Diaspora Film Club, occurring monthly with Cornelius Moore, who is the co-director of California Newsreel, the 52-year-old social issue nonprofit film distribution and production company. He is also an independent film curator, specializing in works from and about the Black world. Modeled after a book club, we expect that you will have already viewed the film when you join us for the discussion. If you haven't already seen the film, please stick around. We just can't guarantee we won't have any spoilers. I want to thank Art Bridges for their generous support of MOAD's virtual programming, and for everyone here today who has joined us, with special appreciation for those who have donated to the museum during this pandemic. We would not be able to produce this programming without your support. Today we will be discussing Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart, a gorgeous documentary about Lorraine.
Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I decided to change my plans. I'm going to watch 20 minutes of this up here and switch
Sorry,
over.
can you please mute? Thank you. Today we will be discussing the beautiful documentary about Lorraine Hansberry, Sighted Eyes and Feeling Heart. We are thrilled to have joining us for the discussion the director and producer, Tracy Heather Strain. Tracy Heather Strain is an independent Emmy-nominated filmmaker specializing in documentary production. She won a 1999 Peabody Award for her first two feature documentaries as part of Blackside's six-part PBS series, I'll Make Me a World, A Century of African American Arts, and another last year for the American Masters television broadcast of her latest directing effort, which we'll be talking about today, Lorraine Hansberry, Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart. This is the first feature film about the late artist activist best known for writing the play A Raisin in the Sun. The biodoc, which premiered at the 2017 Toronto International Film Festival, also netted Tracy a 50th NAACP Image Award for motion picture directing last year and the American Historical Association's John E. O'Connor Film Award. Her other credits include directing for additional PBS documentaries, including California Newsreel's Race, The Power of an Illusion, and Unnatural Causes, Is Inequality Making Us Sick?, as well as nonfiction video projects for nonprofits and educational institutions. A Harvard Graduate School of Education and Wellesley College graduate, Tracy is a professor of the practice teaching documentary production Storytelling and History at Wesleyan University's College of Film and the Moving Image, and co-directs the newly established Wesleyan Documentary Project. Through her company, she co-founded, with her husband, partner Randall McLowry, the Film Posse. The pair is currently directing, producing, and writing a documentary about L. Frank Baum and the Wonderful Wizard of Oz for the PBS history series American Experience. Tracy serves on the board of Sportsman Tennis and Enrichment Center in Boston, Massachusetts, where she lived for almost 40 years. We'll start the discussion with Cornelius and Tracy, and we encourage everyone to participate by making comments and submitting questions through the chat. And finally, please take a moment to type where you're joining us from in the chat. We love finding the diaspora in our audience. So please join me in welcoming Tracy Heather Strain and Cornelius Moore.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome everybody. Thank you, Tracy, for joining us. Welcome to you. I just wanted to begin because Elizabeth mentioned that you're a independent filmmaker, but you're also a teacher. So what is
I have frozen, or you're frozen to me.
Yeah, Cornelius is frozen. I know he was going to ask you about being a teacher, so why don't you just tell us about your experience right now during COVID teaching?
Sure. I think that there's probably some other educators on the line, but it's a really challenging semester, and probably for the rest of the year will be challenging as well. First, I wanted to acknowledge that I am sitting at my home in the land of the ancestral home of the Wangunk. And that means people by the bend of the river. And the Connecticut River has this huge bend, and it's an appropriate name for the people who lived here. Anyway, Wesleyan is very close by and is also on that same land. So anyway, it's just challenging because there are so many unknowns. Fortunately, on our campus, there are no cases, I think, right now, and we get tested every week. It depends on how much you're on campus. The students get tested twice a week. We've had to change our curriculum to accommodate, starting online, to accommodate quarantining. There's always stuff. Our production students have had to follow a lot of rules that are challenging for them, but we keep reminding them that the industry itself has had to follow a lot of rules. But there's still always the unknown, and everyone's a little worn out, tired. Many students have Zoom classes and a lot of Zoom classes, and it can be weary making. And so, but we're all, I think everybody that's eating and working and mobile is grateful and feeling blessed right now, since so many people are having a very difficult time.
So thank you for that. And I wanted to thank you also for being a trailblazer. Can y'all see me? Because my computer's okay, good, because it went off. But thank you for being a trailblazer in this and sort of launching a renaissance going on about Lorraine Hansberry. I mean, after your film, there's Imani Perry's book, Looking for Lorraine, and just saw a short drama on a series called Equal that's going to be on HBO Max about Hansberry. And Soyika Colbert is doing a book, coming out with a book next year, Lorraine Hansberry, an intellectual biography. And then Mark Wilkerson has been working on the book, on a biography for a while. And I think we're anticipating that's going to come out next year. So you led the way. So
yeah, it's funny. I've been interested in Lorraine Hansberry for such a long time. When I saw the play when I was 17 years old, To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, I was struck by her, and she sort of stayed with me, but not always on the surface. It wasn't until I graduated from college after being an American Studies major and was seeing a lot of independent films that I realized that I wanted to make a film about Lorraine Hansberry. And I thought it was going to be like a dramatic film. And the curious thing is I wasn't even a filmmaker. So I kind of left my not so happy job in advertising and direct marketing to learn how to be a filmmaker. And I literally started answering the phones at a place and hoped to make a film about Lorraine Hansberry. I just never imagined in a million years that I would still, by 2017, it would be the first feature film of any sort about her. I remember I had an opportunity to meet Robert Nemiroff, her ex-husband, in 1998. He'd come to Boston for the Huntington Theater production of Lorraine's play, Les Blancs. He had finished it. And he gave a talk at the Boston Public Library. And afterwards, I came up there with my little copy of To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. And I spoke to him and I said, by then I was in documentary. So I was thinking documentary, there really should be a documentary about Lorraine Hansberry. He goes, oh, I know, and I really would like to make it. I hardly had been in the industry at all. So he was yeah, yes, you young lady. There's one in the works. And I was like, oh, that's great. And, I can't wait to see it. And he, generously signed my book. And so I waited and waited and waited and waited. And then I saw in 91 that he had passed away. And so it kind of became my mission. And almost everybody who has met me at least back then, knew I wanted to make a film about Lorraine Hansberry. So.
But was your introduction to Lorraine Hansberry being taken to a Young, Gifted, and Black, right? With your grandmother taking you there, which is quite something too.
Yeah, she was a domestic worker when I was a kid. By that time she wasn't anymore, but she was one of those grandmothers who was like, there's nothing too good for my granddaughters, and she wanted to make sure that we felt empowered and got culture. And also she came out to the suburbs, mostly white suburbs, to come bring us into the city to, do this. So it was really important for her. In fact, she got sort of more activist as she got older. It was kind of interesting.
I didn't realize that someone at some point was thinking about doing a documentary. This is the first time hearing about that.
Well, it was actually Robert Nemiroff and Chiz Schultz.
Okay.
And Chiz Schultz ended up being the executive producer on our documentary. So what happened was, this is the story that Chiz told me, that they had worked together on the PBS American Playhouse version of A Raisin in the Sun. And before that, Chiz was part of Chiz used to work for Harry Belafonte's company. Harry Belafonte's company was the original producer of the Cherry Lane production of To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. That was produced after Lorraine died. And so they were friends, and they were going to make this documentary. And Chiz tells this story about going to meet with American Masters at that time, with the former head. And according to Chiz, it was suggested that when Robert Nemiroff said that he wanted to make a 2-hour film about her, it was rejected and kind of said, there's not enough to say about her in 2 hours. And he stormed off. Oh, God. Okay. So it was really important for me to actually get the film on American Masters. Which happened.
Yes. Yeah, we'll show them, right? So now tell us what were the challenges that made it 14-year journey? Was it the research? Was it the funding? All of the above?
It was everything. Let's just start with the fact that no one, even though many of the things that are in the film were part of our proposals, and I'm not suggesting we wrote the most stellar, amazing proposals, but we were able to get a $500,000 NEH grant with our proposal, and before that, a development grant and other monies. But we couldn't convince kind of the gatekeeper types that she was significant. People kept recommending that we just focus on A Raisin in the Sun, and that was the problem. It was very clear to me, because I started getting Google alerts pretty soon after, I signed up for Google. So we were constantly seeing what was being said about A Raisin in the Sun and Hansberry. And you could tell no one really knew who she was. She had been put on this pedestal, as I like to call it, a icon of the Black middle class Black achievement in the civil rights era. You know, like here's our first, and isn't she awesome? And she was like frozen, and you kind of have that photo of her with the pearls on and her hair's all done, and she was kind of frozen as that person who was this one-hit wonder. And we're, you know, we should be proud of her, of course, but there's not much else to say. And I think that because of the way Raisin in the Sun was taught in classes, she was never presented as an activist. People didn't know she was an activist. People had no idea about much of anything about her, except that she wrote A Raisin in the Sun, and Raisin in the Sun was taught as like this play about American dreams. And, you know, kind of sometimes it was written as an integrationist play, and, you know, just that kind of stuff. And, you know, she had meant it as a protest play. And so I think that clouded the minds of gatekeepers. I think that people like the idea, especially, you know, as media has begun changing and becoming more celebrity driven, the idea of potentially having celebrities, and, you know, if you have to talk about the play, it, you know, you guarantee those, right? And I was always interested in dispelling the notions of what people thought she was and present who she was. I mean, I couldn't cover all that she was, right? But at least I realized that one of the driving ideas, no one really knows who she is, and what story do we need to tell? And that was the story of this woman who really thought she could take art, specifically her writing, and change the world, right? That was going to be her tool. And so that was sort of the story we set out to tell, and did lots and lots of research. Everything wasn't open to us when we first started, but money was one of the biggest issues, raising money. And so, yeah. But we ended up, by the way, going to, I have some statistics for you guys in case you're interested. Let me just find this. Oh, here it is. We create databases for the work that we do because we do a lot of historical work. We have 93 archives credited. In our database, we have 7,465 stills.
Wow.
We have 2,185 pieces of footage and audio records in our database. In the film, there are 493 stills. There's 130 pieces of archival footage. And we have 48 instances when Anika Noni Rose is reading the quotes of Lorraine Hansberry. So those are just some of the details. And so, yeah, it took a while to like find things, find people, but money was the main issue. And so the thing is, you know, we'd work on it a little bit, stop for a while, do some other things, try to stay alive, you know, go back to it, forget, you have to remember what you used to know, you know what I mean? But meanwhile, things are evolving and we're learning more. And it took so long that actually society started changing. You know, when we started the first time, we were applying to the NEH, and actually our first production grant was rejected. Between that time, the first time we applied for the big chunk of money, and the second time when we were successful in 2014, there was a big change. A lot of books came out about Black women as activists, the left, the Black left, you know, ideas about gender and sexuality changed, you know, Supreme Court decision, you know, and so more of, it wasn't like we were not going to put the things in the film that were in the film, but we were able to articulate those areas more clearly because we also had more academic support for it.
So the tagline for the film is, you know, if you know Raisin in the Sun, you don't know Lorraine Hansberry. So, right. And the film certainly presents that. And I'm so glad that you mined and investigated her life as a left-wing activist and the people around her, like Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois and Claudia Jones, and also exploring her lesbian identity, which all of which I think we'll talk about a bit later. But one of the things interesting about Hansberry was, I mean, even though she and her family were well-to-do in Chicago, the South Side of Chicago, it was clear that they and she had connections sympathy or empathy or something with the Black working class in the South Side. What do you think is special about Chicago and the South Side of Chicago where that made that kind of possible?
Well, one of the things that is a lot of people talk about related to Chicago at that time was the intense segregation. That the area where African Americans were able to live was derisively called the Black Belt,
Mm,
and so no matter how well off you were mostly you mostly were forced to live in this area. So people, like in a lot of communities,
mm,
there was a mix of people who did quite well because they ran businesses, and people who were like literally just coming off trains from the South, to get jobs in maybe meat packing or whatever industry they could get find a job in. And so that area was getting more and more crowded, and so people were living quite close to each other.
mm,
And for whatever reason, it may be because Lorraine was an only child, and there was 7 years difference between her and her older
mm.
sister Mamie. She spent a lot of time by herself. Imagine, you're 7 and your sister's 14. Your 14-year-old sister isn't necessarily going to be like hanging out with you all the
Right.
time. And so she was a bookworm, and she idolized her father, but she was also hanging out with other people in the neighborhood. One of the people she hung out with was this couple that Hansboroughs. He'd come
Mm,
from he'd come from Wisconsin. He was a well-known, well-positioned Black communist, and he'd left Wisconsin and came to Chicago to organize. And he lived in one of the Hansberry buildings, and she hung out with them. And
mm,
sometimes people have asked, well, wouldn't her dad was a Republican, and wouldn't that have been a problem? But I've been told by people from the community that those divisions in terms of like people interacting weren't there, and her parents wouldn't have had a problem with her hanging out with him. and
mm,
and
mm.
and even him being a Black Republican, he was quite an activist himself, constantly pushing for change. So I think his republicanism was kind of like that businessman kind of republicanism, as opposed to I don't like Black people
Well,
Republican.
being a Republican then
Right.
was, because the
Pre-FDR.
Democrats had the
Right.
Dixiecrats, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So
So one of the things is that we know about her connection with Paul Robeson. We see it in the film with working at Freedom, the newspaper that he was started. Was she went to when his passport was confiscated, when he's been invited to a peace conference in Uruguay, she went in his stead, and when she came back, her passport was
yeah.
confiscated. So there's a lot of stories like that. I mean, I saw someone, and I knew that from a previous cut of your film.
Mhm.
Um, were people reluctant to talk about her left-wing connections, that history now?
No, and I didn't find anybody that I spoke to that knew about them that was reluctant to speak about them. I mean, I didn't, in terms of when I interviewed Mamie, her sister, I that the details of her activism were less known to me, because one of the things I did was, when we got a chunk of money from the independent television service, was we ran out and tried to get anybody who was over a certain age, because we were nervous that something might happen to them. Obviously, I'm aware that something could happen to anybody at any time, but her sister was one of the people we wanted to make sure we got spoke to early. And because there was no information, like real information as opposed to fluffy information about Lorraine's life in any printed material. And then we subsequently found that a lot of what was printed was incorrect. So a lot of books have incorrect information about Lorraine Hansberry in them. And so when I interviewed Mamie, she talked about her family's activism, but it wasn't framed in a left-wing sort of way. Lorraine's activism, left-wing side, really came out after going to the University of Wisconsin, where she stayed 2 years. She met a lot of students from New York who were, probably already members of the Labor Youth League. She was very involved in the Young Progressives of America. She became the she had a role in the YPA very early on. Like, she was an officer. I can't remember exactly what title she was. I can't believe I'm actually forgetting things already. But she between once the first summer after her first semester of college, it was a part of an interracial group of people in Chicago that were going around trying to organize people to vote for Wallace for president in 48 and 49. I guess it was 48, right?
48, yes. Not this, for people who don't know, not George Wallace. So some people might know George Wallace, but this is the Progressive Party Wallace.
Yeah, and Robeson was as part of the campaign, and her mother and sister were very nervous because it wasn't that it was illegal, but police in the Chicago area could have, been quite harsh with her and the students, and so her mother was very nervous about that. But I'm not sure I knew about that at the time when I interviewed Mamie, for example. But Amy was very forthcoming about the various things that her family used to make them do. She complained about having, when she was like 16, she would have to go into restaurants that they knew they wouldn't be served, just so that they could, her father could make a fuss, and the restaurant would be fined. And she said that the fine would be given to, the cause. He was always working with, different groups of people, like the people in the local NAACP and other work groups, different business people, to try to make change. And so even like her moving to that, the house they moved to, the family, that was a strategy. He didn't just decide, I want to live on this, in this neighborhood all of a sudden.
Okay, that's good to know, the strategy. And just so people know, Lorraine Hansberry's sister is still alive in Southern California. And
she's 99.
Yeah, right. So it's great, that you, Henry Wallace, somebody put that there. Thank you, Maria. The first name. That you have all these people who unfortunately have passed, like Ruby Dee, and this other folk, so it's great that you had got those people on camera, and we have, their comments on tape. I want to ask about another maybe controversial aspect of Hansberry's life, her lesbian identity, her lesbian social circles. So talk a bit about that, where people, just so people have a context, when in the 50s and the like, it was illegal. It was, we put away for mental illness and lose their jobs. But it wasn't until 1970 when Barbara Greer, I think her name was, who was the editor of The Ladder, the lesbian publication, revealed that Hansberry had written a couple letters to the publication. But that was 1970, and now when you're trying to make the film, you're presumably looking for people who could talk about her Hansberry's social networks. And I'm curious how open people were to talking, to be on camera, even 30, 40, 50 years later.
So because I finally had the privilege of looking at Hansberry's papers, I was able to identify people that I should talk to. And I did track down several people, and they were willing to talk to me in person and told me some lovely stories, but none of them would agree to be on camera. And I tried so hard, and I I did find someone who would have gone on camera. This was late. This was like
Mhm.
2017 even, or 2016. And unfortunately, she wasn't able to, she wouldn't have worked on camera. She wasn't able to, she was not able to communicate successfully in a way that would have worked for a television program.
Mhm.
She would lose her memory in the middle of sentences and things like that. It just wasn't, going to work. And then there was another person who had told awesome stories, and we had actually put them in the NEH proposal, and people had commented on them, and she wouldn't agree. At first it was like she was going to write a book and she thought it would interfere with her book.
Mhm.
And then later we tried again. We kept giving people time, and we let years go by. We'd go back to them and see, hopefully, if they were still with us. And this one woman, it seemed like she was going to say yes. I was so happy. But then she backed out because she didn't want to be on cameras. The only thing she would have agreed to was an audio interview. And the reason we didn't do an audio interview is because we didn't want that section to be different. Like,
Mhm.
it would have stood out in a way that wouldn't have been it would have caused, like, why is this section different kind of thinking,
Right.
right?
It's a
And
film. It's visual. You want.
right. And so we did interview oh my gosh. um the one woman that's in the film,
Edie Windsor.
yeah, Edie Windsor. Sorry, I apologize, you guys. I know it's only 8 something here, but I've had a hard week. But Edie Windsor, and we thought that she was able to remember more things than she actually did, because
Mhm.
she had this story. Apparently, she drove back from the Philadelphia tryout. She got a lift back to New York with Lorraine one night. She was best friends she'd gone to high school with someone that was like Lorraine's first lover, which happened around the night of, like, around the time of A Raisin and Son's Broadway premiere. But it just, like, that was another hard interview to, like, actually
Mhm.
incorporate into the story. And so we were grateful that she agreed, and we were able to include what we could.
Mhm.
But that's it. Yeah, it was hard. It was real. We tried everything. And
Mhm.
one person who even claimed she had photos of a trip with Lorraine on Cape Cod. Unfortunately, she passed away, and without ever saying yes. There's another person who has a kind of a famous partner that Lorraine had a really just loved. And I talked with her on the phone, and she didn't feel comfortable
Mhm.
speaking. So, I have to, and even other people who are part of the community tried to get this person to agree.
Mhm.
And I have to respect people's privacy and their sense of what they feel is appropriate, or maybe whatever, that maybe pacts were made a long time ago that they felt, it didn't matter what year it was or decade, that I wasn't going to break the bond of this group.
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
Mhm. But you have home movie in your film, and
Yeah,
of well, I'm deducing that it was people socializing together.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
special.
Right, yeah, and I don't know everyone's name. I only know the names of maybe one person, and um, yeah. Some people have asked who shot those movies. I'm sure Lorraine shot some of it because she talked in her journals about getting the camera.
Okay.
But it's also possible that some of the footage could have been shot by Nemerov. I'm not saying that maybe some of it, like maybe there's some footage of them by the women at the water. I don't think he was there shooting that, but the stuff, but the stuff at home, uh, it's lots of people were up there. Baldwin
Mm-hmm.
came up, and Nemerov was
Mm-hmm.
up there. I mean, they were still very close, even though, they weren't, you know, they were basically separated. He was still helping run her businesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I've asked you what you what something that really surprised you about Hansberry that you didn't know when you found out while doing research for the film?
Mm.
And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
mentioned something. I'm curious. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things I mentioned, well, first of all, I always tell people this: if you work on a film for 14 years, after a while, you don't remember what surprised you, you know. But one thing that I do remember that surprised me is that I had no idea that Lorraine had been engaged before she married Robert Nemiroff, and she was engaged to an African American activist, and it didn't work out. And she wrote him the most awesome Dear John letter. And in the 4-hour version of our film, which is also known as the rough cut, that was in there, but it was harsh. So that was one thing that surprised me. And I said something else, and I'm kind of forgetting what the other thing was that I said. Do you remember?
I think that was it.
That was it? Okay.
But but to segue into what you regret not being able to put in the
Okay.
2-hour version, and
Mhm.
you gave me some
Yeah.
three things.
Yeah. So that was one of the things, because I thought that was interesting,
Mm,
because, but just because of the fact that she ended up marrying someone white, it would have helped, um, explain that he also was someone in the same movement. Like, she was attracted to people who were activists and who were trying to
mm,
make change. And so
mm,
his picture is actually in the documentary. There's a picture of her walking on the street with a sign, and she's a raincoat on, and he's standing
mm,
next to her. And he's also in
mm,
a photo. There's an American flag. He's speaking, and there's a
mm,
flag behind him. So
mm,
that's the guy. I was disappointed that I had to take out the scene of the Chicago tryouts. So
mhm,
once Philadelphia was successful, the Shuberts had come and said, yes, we'll give you a theater, but we don't have one right now. Go to Chicago and wait, and we'll have a theater in New York for you. And it's hard to explain this now, or for people to understand this now, but at that time, cities like Boston and Chicago were really, really important to the success of plays, those out of town tries. And so Chicago was known for this really harsh critic.
okay.
And so they were nervous about going there. And they were having some difficulties on the set. And so Lorraine and everybody takes the train to Chicago, and things are, they're tweaking the play. And Lorraine tells Lloyd Richards that she has to leave. She's been told there's a warrant out for her arrest, and she has to leave town. And he's like, what? You're leaving? Like, they're working on the play. And so she says, I'll work on it. And she goes back to New York. The reason that she had to leave is her name was still on a piece of property, or at least one piece of property. And the family was, the Hansberry's money came from real estate. And after the father died, the sister and the two brothers were running the company. It's unclear how things were going, but they all talk about the fact that the Daily Machine was like after them. And so it was perceived as a way to embarrass the family, to have potentially arrested Lorraine. And even though she wasn't running the company, she was living in New York, and so she ended up leaving. And what happened was, Lloyd would watch the play each night, and he would send Lorraine notes about things. He'd call her. What am I saying? It's like the 50s. He'd call her on the phone and tell her what was going on, what he thought needed to happen. She would stay up all night and work on the play. And then she would call him the next day with like notes and new scenes. And so they worked on it that way. And one of the things that Lloyd was working on was, the play got funded because of Sidney Poitier, right? And so he was the big star. And what was happening, one of the things that was happening, which is partially a remnant of the fact that the play used to be called, the play used to be kind of based, inspired by a different poem by Langston Hughes, The Crystal Stair. It was more about the mother And so it was changing, and there were still remnants of the old version there. And so Sidney wasn't getting the applause. Like, he would come out last, and the applause for Claudia was more, and it was causing problems. And so they were working on that. And so it was kind of dramatic, you know, how this was happening. And so that scene, I missed that scene. This is a long story, but I missed that scene because when it finally works in New York, first, by the way, Claudia, the critic in Chicago liked the film, so didn't, you know, mess things up. But when it finally worked in New York, I felt like you were emotionally even more excited. Like I remember myself watching my own film, feeling misty-eyed every time, you know, that we got to the part where they were standing up cheering in New York because they had gone through so much. You know, they always say the struggle makes things sweeter. Like Nadal was just talking about that today too when he won the French Open. So that was one scene. Another scene was when she was on Playwright at work, and there's clips of that in the documentary. They performed a scene of her play Toussaint, and so Lloyd was there. He had directed it, and you got to see just something else of her work in footage. But
so Lloyd Richards, they worked together a number of times.
Actually, another time they enjoyed working together. It's a shame that, you know, Nemiroff didn't want to have him work on the last play, A Sign in Sydney Brucine Twiddle. It's another story. But the thing, but one of the scenes I really miss is the scene where Lorraine is talking about Africa and slavery and going down south. And she had written this play called The Drinking Gourd. And it was commissioned by Doris Sherry. It's going to be a part of a 5-part special, a celebration of the centenary of the Civil War, and 1963. And she was the first person out of the gate, and hers was going to be about slavery. It was about slavery, and people liked it. They thought it was a really strong teleplay. She was actually writing this before, I think, even Raisin opened on Broadway, but at least, around that time. And they couldn't get any advertisers to support it, and it ended up having the whole thing was scrapped. It would have been Roots before Roots. It was a really frank look at slavery from the side of both the slave holder and the slave family, and it had a harsh ending, well, harsh in terms of white audiences ending. The black character wasn't trying to soothe anybody's, wounds, and so she was talking with Langston Hughes and James Baldwin and 2 other people, and there's audio of it, and she's talking about this story. And also we were mixing it in with this story about her going down south and meeting her grandmother, who, from the eyes of a kid, she'd been told this woman was a great beauty, and she didn't seem like that to her, but also it didn't seem like Gone with the Wind down there to her. And it was just a kind of another dimension, and sort of allowing us to show that she was very focused on slavery in this time period, in the late 50s and early 60s. She was very concerned about Africa. So were her parents. I mean, when in the 30s, when Italy invaded Ethiopia, she said her mother was so pissed. She was pissed at the Pope. She was just really, really angry. And she talked about, ever since she was like 3 years old, she knew that somebody somewhere was mistreating Black people. That's the family she was from,
So she was from a family of internationalists and Pan-Africanists, and that her uncle, Leo Hansberry, was a pioneering Africanist. And
yes.
I would imagine that he also influenced her intellectually and as an activist.
Yes, he did. So her father's brother, William Leo Hansberry, ended up getting a BA from Harvard, and then he got a fellowship in anthropology, and studied, got his master's from Harvard, and ended up going to Chicago to study more, and I went to Oxford, and then lands in at Howard. He's bringing and he goes to Africa, and he comes back and brings back people to the house in Chicago, his brother's house in Chicago. So some of the, a lot of Africans would come to Howard to study. And so, Nkrumah was at the Hansberry home in Chicago, and Nnamdi Azikiwe was there,
Wow.
so who became the first president of Nigeria.
Mhm.
So yeah, she was she was meeting these people,
Right.
you know. So it's kind of interesting because we were talking about this before you all
Mhm.
joined us, but when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, people weren't talking about Africa. I didn't really know about 1619 until I was an adult person, And so she
Mhm.
was talking about, that I have that quote in the film later in the 60s when she's talking about it. Since 1619, Negroes have tried
Mhm.
every method. And, so yeah, she was, she also studied with Du Bois. So,
Right, she's a really boy, and also, um, I was gonna say, about the Toussaint Louverture play. It was about Haiti, so it wasn't just the African continent; it was the Caribbean and the whole African diaspora. So
yeah.
that's incredibly impressive. So because I know there are a lot of people who have asked questions, but before we go to that, I want to ask you one more question about.
Mhm.
It sounds like you're not done with Lorraine Hansberry. So, and people have been asking about that. Are you planning other things? And if you are, tell us.
Yeah. So, excuse me. Um, we are planning to we have a lot of material that has information. Let me start over. We shot over 30 interviews. And if they are this long, this much is in the documentary. And in these other parts are stories that aren't in any books. And they
Mm,
probably won't be in any books that are coming out in the future because many of the people we interviewed had passed away. And also, certain situations, I've done so much study, you evoke certain kinds of responses, right?
mm, mm,
And so I think it'd be a shame to have that just exist on the cutting room floor.
mm,
I would like to share those stories, and so we want to create a series of video shorts to share. We also would like to, on our Hansberry site, sidedeyesfeelingheart.com, everybody that's in the film, and even the people who didn't make in the film, we want to have, right now there's like a frame grab of each person. We'd like in the future that you could click on it and there's a page for each person. And there's another video that not only just that tells a little bit about their stories, because many of their stories haven't been told. And they've shared, I often let people talk about themselves as well. And they shared some very interesting stories about their own lives, which I think is an important contribution to just African American studies, right?
mm,
And in addition to whatever connections with Lorraine and other stories, we have great stories about behind the scenes of the Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun. I'd like, the outtake that didn't make it in me, I'd like to get there. Stories about them playing poker downstairs in the basement, every night. There's funny stories, and there's just, there's a range of things that could be shared. So that's one thing. I want to have a limited series podcast with some of the other people who have studied Hansberry and just kind of have a chats about things related to her.
mm,
I'd like to, I also would like to create something for teachers specifically, like a text base that, maybe has the script in it, but also a thematic arrangement of some of the bites that some of the segments from the interviews that we did, sort of, organized thematically. So there's a lot of possibilities. But one thing the NEH is actually kind of was excited about when I mentioned it was something for younger people, or let's say people of all ages, like a graphic novel about
oh,
Hansberry's
okay.
life.
Okay. So how can people follow that?
Well, once again, we go back to the old the issue of money.
Mm,
And, we're going to have to pay for rights for things to, beyond our interviews if we want to have photos and other things.
mm.
We have a fiscal sponsor, Center for Independent Documentary, and we have a page. So if you are interested in making a donation, you can do so there.
What
And
is documentaries.org?
Yeah, wait, hold on. Yeah, let me double check because one is the IDA and one is, yeah, no, it's documentary. Yeah, documentaries, IES
Dot
org.
org. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And yeah, so that's what we are hoping to, to do. That's part of it. But yeah, it's really exciting to see that so many people are suddenly interested in her. It's what we wanted. We were really just motivated by having people understand who she was and to try to get some of the erroneous ideas about her life and who she was, corrected. One of my favorite things of trying to like stop is there's this picture of James Baldwin dancing with someone and everyone keeps saying it's Hansberry. It's not Hansberry. And I'm like, it's not Hansberry.
Yeah, I guess another thing that that people, even in the reviews and articles, they say that she died of pancreatic cancer, and it was
Yeah.
stomach cancer.
Well, it's cancer of the duodenum, according to one of the scholars on our team who got it directly from Robert Nemiroff. The cancer did spread to her pancreas, but no one seemed to want to hear the word duodenum. So we never said, but that's why in the film we actually never say what kind of cancer, but everyone does keep saying pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, they do. So there are a lot of questions, and I follow some of them about somebody asked, Elizabeth can chime in too, where can people find Freedom? Her articles that were in Freedom newspaper. Are all some of those things in the Schomburg available there in the archive?
I think some of the Freedom, well, so Dorothy Burnham, the widow of Louis Burnham, who was the editor of Freedom magazine, I think she has her own collection at the Schomburg. I believe that she does.
Okay, that's something to explore. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go to some of the
questions? Why don't you go to some of the questions? Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure. The first question was, do your online archives contain any of the Emily Jones material?
So our archive is not actually online, but Emily Jones. So we have some Emily Jones stuff in the documentary, but we have some of the article. I think those were the articles she wrote to One. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Okay, the next one is, was there any material in your archives and research that is still not supported? Are there significant areas of her life that are not touched on in the film? How did she manage to stay out of trouble for her communist history given all the FBI surveillance?
So, she was followed around by the FBI all the time, ever since, so when she went to Uruguay to speak in Robeson's place. First of all, she told the State Department she was going to Europe so she could get her passport.
Okay.
And then the actual peace conference it was supposed to be in some other country, but the United States government kept pressuring it, like for who knows why, but a peace conference. The idea of peace, it's like so radical. We're gonna like not let this happen. But so it was happening in Uruguay, and she talked about the fact that they would have to sit there and they'd have their speeches and things, but if the police came, they would all start dancing and doing different things as if they were doing something else. But she was still writing for Freedom from afar. And so, since they're paying attention to this Robeson publication, they know who she is now, and they know that she's not in Europe. So her passport was canceled when she came back. And ever since that time, she was followed for the rest of her life. So what eventually happened, and I talked to people, and they talked about the fact that the FBI would talk to them. I didn't see any redacted. The things I saw were redacted, so I don't know who the people are. I'm sure I interviewed people who said, some people said some things, and they would tell Lorraine certain things that they told, but they weren't telling, damning things. At least the people that's what they told me. But I'm sure there's people I interviewed who did say things that were probably harmful. It's curious that the FBI agent went to see A Raisin and Son at the tryouts, he actually liked the film, I mean, the play, and thought it was like, he had kind of like a review of it, and talked about how there wasn't anything going to incite anybody in there. So, and I think it seems pretty clear from the FBI papers themselves that the reason they didn't pursue it is that they thought it would be embarrassment. The FBI would have problems if they were to come after her in some way.
Okay. Do you know of any teachers who are using the film currently?
I think
A lot of people bought them.
Yeah. A lot of teachers. I'm going to speak with 2 teachers this week. I spoke on my own campus last week. There are a lot of people that seem to be using the film, probably many that we don't even, that, Cornelius doesn't even know about, because it's available. A lot of schools subscribe to Canopy with a K, and so it's almost like a Netflix for education and in libraries, and so people can see it there.
And that's how some people have seen it before tonight. And not that I want trying to plug this, but if people want DVDs, California Newsreel sells them as well, or makes them available for the price that we have on our website.
Yeah. So but we're really excited. I'm personally excited that people are like understanding more who she was, and hopefully that the way Raisin in the Sun is being taught is changing now because of the film.
Do you have any unique insights that you gathered from the Lorraine Hansberry's writings in the latter?
So one of the things that's so interesting about Lorraine is like, she was a fun-loving person, but she was also very serious and intellectual about everything. And so it's kind of interesting. She had this whole intellectualization of being a lesbian. You know what I mean? She didn't just I like I'm women and I this and this. It was like, let me ponder the state of women in society, and she just had these analyses of things, and it was kind of like, it could be draining at times, because even just on anytime we read any of her letters to or from somebody, it required us to do extra research, partly because of the time period, because there'd be references from that time, books that came out at the time or writings. But she was so well read, and she, was drawing on literature and philosophy and this and that. And so we were constantly like, well, what is this just her talking, or is she referencing something we should know about? So it was, so even like her stuff in the latter was similar and similar to that. So I apologize, I've lost the train of what the question was, but insight is that, I guess that was about insight. She was a deep thinker, and she thought there would be a time when people could walk down the street and hold hands and it wouldn't be an issue. She wrestled with things about dykes versus just everything. She thought of it all. Married lesbians was a big topic of hers. That actually is in the film. There was a lot there, and that's and we probably could have talked about more things if I had only gotten someone to agree to be on camera of the time. It was important that someone from the time speak.
Well, we're coming to the close of our time, although I do want to get one more question in. Question says, it seems to me the Hansberry family is part of a radical Black tradition, parentheses, race man. Your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. And I think that there are lots of families that probably haven't gotten their due. And Chicago is full of a lot of people who are activists. And people in New York always talked about how feisty the people from Chicago were, and sometimes still do. Chicago had all of these businesses there. A lot of times things get very New York centric in terms of the African American experience, but Chicago had, the big black insurance agent companies were there, the hair companies, you know, the
Ebony Jet.
Ebony Jet, I think the First Society of Black Accountants. You know what I mean? There's just all this richness there, and there were a lot of families there that were activist families. But yes, Hansberry's family is a part of an activist tradition, and I think that, you know, that's why one of our major theme for this, when you apply for the NEH, you have to have like humanities theme, but this wasn't a stretch or anything. Lorraine's story is the embodiment of the long view of civil rights. You know, it didn't just start with Brown versus Board of Education. There had been activism going on, even, of course, before the Hansberry family, right? So it's always been the case. But it was great to have her even articulate this herself. Again, like when she says, since in 1964, since 1619, Negroes have tried every method of communication, of transportation, and, you know, it's just, you know, the cause, it's just unbearable, you know, that they're being asked to slow down and to wait. So yeah.
Somebody had asked about Sidney Boostine and, you know, the play, and if there's we could, or maybe even just for all her plays, is there a way to see how they've been produced, and maybe even sort of probably Broadway or off Broadway or anything? Is there a database on that about that you know about?
I don't think you well, you know, there's a in the way that there's a IMDb, there's a theater database, right? But there's only been the one Broadway production. I saw the Sign in Sidney Brustine's window for the first time. I think it was 2013 when Oregon Shakespeare Festival put it on, and then Chicago put it on maybe 2014 or 15. I didn't go see that version. I believe the Trust is trying to get a version going, but I don't think they're shooting for Broadway, but I don't know where they are with that. You know, Les Blancs was recently performed, rather recently performed in London. They just, earlier this year, I think it was this year, they made it available so that you could see it from anywhere in the world. So no, there's not like one big database of all of these performances, but sadly, except for maybe the London performance, most of them aren't recorded. It's also complicated with rights issues and things like that. You know, like people used to ask me, well, why don't you just recreate some scenes in, you know, from A Raisin in the Sun in your film? Well, I couldn't, because Sony Pictures owns the motion picture rights. And Sony Pictures already charges $50,000 to have those few clips in the film that you saw. Yeah, so it's these things can be complicated. I just wanted to say one other thing, by the way, about why these projects are so expensive, and it's because of rights. A lot of the times, you know, we spent $300,000 on rights for this film, and you know, that's the cost of some individual documentaries. But it was really important for me to make a film. Like, there's like 5 or 6, I don't know how many films there were on public television about the Roosevelts and different people, you know? And I felt like Lorraine Hansberry needed the same kind of treatment that what the Roosevelts or Arthur Miller or anybody else that was an American master. You know, I wasn't willing to compromise on the materials and the quality. I tried to make it the best quality film possible, because I feel like the stories about Black people need to be presented that way too. And so the idea, I kind of would get insulted when people suggested I needed to bring the budget down, because I already have been making films for American Experience that were around the same kinds of budgets, right? So why should I suddenly do Hansberry and accept less? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Can we? You mentioned the Lorraine Hansberry Literary Trust, and I think people just should know that too as a resource.
Yeah, there's a website. It's Lorraine, like the initials, .org. And you can see more
Hansberry
things about,
Literary Trust.
yeah, .org, yeah. And you can see things about more quotes and different things and materials and things there.
Somebody put that in there.
Yeah, thank you.
Nadia.
Mhm.
Great.
Thank you
Thank
both
you.
so much. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Cornelius, as always. This has been a
Thank
really
you.
enriching and wonderful discussion. And I hope that anybody who is on the call today who hasn't seen the film will enjoy it as soon as possible. And we all look forward to more work by you, Tracy. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming, you guys. And it was really
Yes.
nice chatting with you, Cornelius, and finally
Thank you.
seeing you after so long in person.
That's great. Me too.
Bye. Have a good night
Bye.
or good afternoon.
Yeah.
Bye.
And I also just want to remind everyone that our next program will be on November 8th, 5 p.m. again, Pacific time, and we'll be discussing a film called W.B. Du Bois, a biography in 4 parts. And we will have the filmmaker, Louis Messiah, with us to be in conversation with Cornelius. So we're really excited about that. And if you have a moment to fill out the survey online that should pop up when you close your window, or you can click the link that I just put in the chat. You can take a photo of the QR code that's on the screen, but we would love to get feedback from you. And also, thank you to everyone who has donated to MOAD. If you can donate anything to help support our virtual programming, we would love any amount is welcome, and you can donate on our website at moadsf.org/donate, or you can text the number 56512, type MOAD-SF, and follow the link to make a donation. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, especially Tracy and Cornelius for giving us your time and for this beautiful film and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.